Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. Today, a good old-fashioned hands-on review here, like the good old days. I will always do my watch reviews. This is part of the Elegance Collection, which came out a few years ago from Grand Seiko. And this, in fact, is a model from 2022. Now, I'll do a quick wristwatch check. As always, I'm wearing the good old Explorer. There it is, on the Valor strap that I co-designed with Wrist Candy Watch Club. Very, very special strap, and I think this combination is perhaps my favorite. I've been wearing these two together for absolutely donkey's years. But anyway, let's get on with it, shall we? Now, today's watch is a very serious one indeed, so I don't want to waste your time with a vapid 4-minute corporate fake review. There's a lot to learn and talk about here, so please do give this video a like if you would like to see more independent reviews like this from the perspective of a real watch enthusiast. The obsession the Japanese have had in competing against the West has its roots as far back as the 1800s, as the country pushed itself to become less dependent on foreign imports during the rapid industrialization and modernization after the Meiji Restoration of 1868. This increased demand for all types of timepieces within Japan, both domestically and militarily. The Swiss had a 50% share of the global watch market pre-World War II, and as raw components from the Swiss were not subject to import tariffs, along with being superior to anything at the time made in Japan, they provided 69% of Japan's watch parts from 1915 to 1935. With the outbreak of World War II, the Swiss remained neutral, while the majority of the rest of the world switched its manufacturing capabilities to the war effort, Japan included, thus further boosting Swiss watch market share dominance. After the war, to understand his Swiss rivals, Seiko's founder, Kintaro Hattori, would hire engineering students directly from Tokyo's universities to study Swiss-made movements, along with their watchmaking tools, methods, and the machinery that made them. With the slow post-war decline of the American watchmaking industry, Seiko pushed hard to compete with the Swiss. Hattori founded 2 factories within the Seiko brand. They would compete internally, with one factory producing King Seiko and the other Grand Seiko, each designated by a special logo to denote which factory on the dial or caseback. By the late 1960s, this inter-brand rivalry would culminate in mechanical watches that could compete and win at almost every chronometer accuracy trial in Switzerland. But Hattori was not just betting on one horse in this race. Simultaneously, he put together a team of scientists to research and develop quartz technology, releasing it commercially and changing the world forever in 1969. The subsequent quartz crisis would see the Swiss shrink from a 40% global market share in 1974 to just 10% in 1984, with half their brands going bankrupt as a result.
The Casio AX210. It's a watch, a digital watch, and a monthly calendar. If it's a wet Christmas, here's the Watersports W200. Water resistant to a depth of 100 meters.
We wish you a happy Casio.
By that time, the digital watch craze had exploded on the affordable entry level, as LED displays gave way to superior LCD technology with their longer battery life. The Swiss brands that did survive mainly did so by diversifying traditional mechanical watches into a more luxury and aspirational product. Export of digital watches peaked at 10 times the amount of mechanical watches by 1990, which was in fact 20% of total Japanese exports. In comparison, Swiss watch exports plummeted from 83% in the early 1970s to just 20% in the late 80s. The Japanese watch market would then stagnate with the rise of the manufacturing capabilities of China during the late 90s, eventually forcing them to also outsource production offshore and then diversifying their higher end by relaunching Grand Seiko in the late 2000s. Grand Seiko would eventually become a fully self-reliant independent sub-brand in 2017. So we'll start off with the size, and we have a very contemporary size. I gotta say, It is absolutely perfect. I think this will please most wrists. We have quite a pronounced double-domed sapphire crystal, and for the display back. But I have to say the look, feel is absolutely perfect. I don't think I could ask for more in terms of, you know, crowd-pleasing proportions, although there is one. We'll get into that in the negatives, of course. Just a great kind of like everyday watch scale, I would say. It does feel extremely refined and solid. We have this 9-link, almost like a Milanese style double push button deployment there, wonderfully signed, and included is an extra strap. Again, we'll come back to that later. Now, if we bring in my wife's Intramatic from Hamilton, do you guys remember this watch? Extremely handsome and elegant, kind of 60s inspired, I would say dress watch really, but look at the bracelet, very similar. The only difference is that these links are a little bit longer, these are shorter, so this is actually even more fluid and comfortable. There are no micro adjustments, unfortunately, but with these small links here, you can get a quite precise fit. But what I love about this is in the box, they include a printout of the regulation of the watch. It's a classy thing to do, and I think if you're buying a luxury watch, you want to have all the trimmings. There is no screw down crown here, but the winding is absolutely very refined feeling. Obviously it's entirely stainless steel. We've got the mix of directional brushing there, and then this mirror high polish, that is the Zaratsu. I always get it wrong, but it's just of a high level than your traditional polishing you're used to from the Swiss, undoubtedly. The caliber 9S63 is part of the 9S family of movements and was introduced in 2019. It's a mechanical manual wind movement with an impressive 72-hour power reserve and regulated to deliver an accuracy of about +5 to -3 seconds a day. However, as always, I found this to be way more accurate, just like every single GS I've ever reviewed. This is due to the extensive regulation process that goes far beyond most mechanical watches outside of the METAS testing level. This is also a rather important caliber. It's actually been 8 years since the last time GS updated its non-spring drive manual wind calibers. Why so long? Well, it's based on the 9S64, but in order to achieve the small seconds register at the 9 o'clock and the power reserve indicator at the 3 o'clock, in this very specific and unique dial layout without an offset power reserve that famously a lot of people complain about when it comes to Grand Seiko, their watchmakers had to completely redesign the gear train. As a result, the caliber 9S63 has nearly 20% more components, 33 joules, not 24 like before, but it does operate at the same frequency of 28,800 vibrations an hour. Developed, like the entirety of the watch, completely in-house by Seiko. While it is a very thin movement, it also has a high magnetic resistance rating. This is thanks to the balance spring being made of a shock-resistant and anti-magnetic alloy. This is a big advantage over its far more delicate Swiss dress watch rivals. And speaking of the Swiss, while it may not have as much decoration as you would see from something similar, from let's say Breguet, AP, JLC, etc., there is still a ton of hand polishing on the components, which is easily comparable to anything horology. But it's not just there to tart it up and look pretty. In typical Japanese fashion, it's also there to improve performance. For example, to ensure the efficient transfer of power from the mainspring, Seiko's watchmakers have painstakingly polished every single groove between the gear's teeth, astonishingly one by one. And this takes a very long time, so you begin to understand why it costs as much as it does. This is all then hand regulated and hand assembled at the newly completed Shizu Koishi studio. Now, two little addendums to the movement. It is hackable, so if I pull the crown out, this sub-seconds there has stopped. And secondly, with this long power reserve, it makes a great Monday to Friday watch, because obviously you take it off on a Friday, come Monday morning, after you put it down for something a little bit more sporty, a little bit more fun for the weekend, Monday morning it's still going. So when it comes to the look of the GS, there are two fundamental things we have to address. Now, the first thing is that this pretty much stays true to those 11 design rules, or the design language set in 1967 with the creation, and I'll put it here on this side of the screen, of the Grand Seiko 44 GS. Now, if you look at the list of those rules on Wikipedia, I'll also try and include it. This pretty much ticks all of them, but it's worthy to point out that every Grand Seiko doesn't always, it's just the majority of the design rules. It's not vehemently adhered to. It's not like if it doesn't have all 11, it's not a Grand Seiko. It's just the kind of design guidelines rather than design laws, shall we say. The second aspect we got to talk about is that dial. Something that has become a signature feature of almost every highly desired Grand Seiko, and arguably what the brand has become synonymous with among watch enthusiasts. However, this is very different, maybe even a first for GS, and this makes this watch really stand out compared to most of what the brand offers. GS typically takes inspiration from Mother Nature, whether it be the now iconic snowflake-inspired dials, seasons of the years, or textures and colours found in the natural elements. A tradition we have talked about extensively on the channel and is deeply ingrained in Japanese art, design, and culture. Nature is always depicted larger, or given more importance than mankind in most Japanese art, thus reflecting mankind's place, or you could say man's insignificance in relation to existence, faith, time, and of course nature. This time, the mesmeric anchor grey dial features a very intricate, concentric, almost tapisserie style pattern that subtly gets smaller towards the centre. The tapering, multifaceted applied markers also reinforce this by pointing inwards beautifully, giving the impression that you're looking into some kind of well. Now, something very interesting here with this watch that is unusual with modern watches, if we zoom in, look at the tip of the minute hand. It's slightly curved to meet the curvature of that dial to avoid parallax errors when looking at it at an angle for precision in reading. This is not typical in modern contemporary watch design. This is something more you see in like World War II watches. The 417 hand heart is a prime example, a bit of a throwback to the glory days of mechanical watchmaking. Unlike other watches from the Elegance Collection, this one is very unique as it takes inspiration from the textures found in the traditional Japanese art of Nanbu tekki, which is a form of iron working from the pre-industrial revolution and the isolationist Edo period, which was from about 1603 to 1868. So why is this so unusual? Well, it's a man-made art form, rather than something found naturally. With this being released just for the US market only, is this some kind of commentary or a deliberate contrast to Japanese tradition with a subtle nod to the industrialized might of the USA? After all, this was the age when Hokusai printed his famous Great Wave, when shoguns and samurais ruled. Regardless of the reason, it does represent an age of classicism that is of course very fitting for a dress watch in the equally fitting Elegance Collection, not to mention it being so damn beguiling to behold, especially how it plays in different lighting situations. Now, the first negative for me is the rather low water resistance of only 30 meters. While it's not the end of the world, I feel it should have been a bit higher. It's the same as the Navitimer, but the Navitimer has an excuse because of course you got more points of entry with the bezel all around here, then the pushers, the crown as well, because obviously it's a chronograph, whereas this doesn't have that excuse. I think it should have been 50 meters. Or even 100 would have just made it amazing. It certainly is possible. I don't see why they couldn't fit that extra gaskets into the case. Next is the bracelet. It doesn't taper at all. I don't know if it's just me, but I really like it when bracelets taper. I think they're more elegant. You've got less weight there. In fact, actually, this lug width is another negative. This should have really been rounded down to an even number, either 18 or made to 20 instead of the 19 it is, and they did include an extra strap to kind of make up for it. It's always a conflict of interest. It's the designer wants it very specific proportions, whereas the enthusiast, the wearer, wants it more compatible with different straps. Another negative is obviously there is no luminescence, but unlike the Evolution 9 collection, which bizarrely has no lume, I just don't understand why, because they're so sporty looking. This is a dressier affair, so absolutely fine. Now, the big elephant in the room is always going to be price with Grand Seiko, but then again, if you look what a proprietary made luxury watch to this kind of specification with these complications from, let's say, Breguet or JLC or blah blah blah, you're still, you know, you're kind of there. It's just because it's Seiko, I guess that stigma still is around. I'm not sure. And while we're on the subject of the bracelet, we have pin connected links, which is just amazing to think how much money but I mean, Patek still use it. I think the argument is that with these quite slender links, it's difficult to do a screwed links. This is a turning point for GS, undoubtedly, but one that flew under the radar, unfortunately for many, myself included. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe with the death of true watch journalism, I just find it very difficult to keep up to date with all the new releases. But it begs the question, what will they take inspiration from next? Maybe something modern, the iconic organic dotted patterns of Yayoi Kusama, or the cutesy, deliberately kitsch, psychedelic smiling flowers of Takashi Murakami. Regardless, this remains a very special piece indeed, that stands out from the rest of the nature-themed offerings. And I feel this was perhaps its true motivation, to make it unique. I mean, how many dials can you do that's inspired by ice and water and leaves and all the rest of it? I think it's actually quite complimentary that the Japanese decided to honor America with this new style. For me, it quite literally did stand out when I visited Moya Fine Jewelers to host an event earlier this year. As they are an official AD for GS, they had a whole plethora available in their display cabinet. And despite being flanked by so many other brighter colors and louder designs, I was immediately drawn to this model. It says a lot about a watch, especially in a grayscale monochromatic color scheme. So I have to say a quick thank you to Moya Fine Jewelers for lending this in and making this review video possible. GS does dials like no other brand, but with such a stringent set of design rules, it almost becomes the only thing, aside from the innovation mechanically, that they can have more freedom in expressing a little bit of design pizzazz. And I feel it really works here with the more overall restrained character of the watch, especially combined with that case design when compared to the more sporty shapes and style that you get when you typically think of GS. The overall curves used on the deliberately wide, unbeveled lugs are also without the signature angled ends. In fact, it reminds me of my mother's old Volkswagen Beetle, the way the overall line and curvature gently slopes down in small steps like the pedestal of a Doric column. From the gentle balance in the positioning of the applied details in relation to the placement of the complications, the Gothic script, and the dial itself, there's a lot of refinement here, far beyond the zeratsu and hairline finishing on all those razor-sharp surfaces. Seiko used the term understatement as artistry, and this unquestionably demonstrates the art and skill required in killing one's own design darlings and doing a lot more with less. Unequivocally pure class. This remains not only a refined choice for the true enthusiast, but one who also understands the legacy of Japanese watchmaking. For me, I'm not quite there yet. I'm going to wait probably until next year to see what I can pick up in Japan. I do want to make that trip happen. Let's, fingers crossed, facciamo la corna. Do nominate more watches from Grand Seiko for me to review in the comments. Don't forget to like this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.